Recording starting.
Good. Well, it's really fantastic to be here. As I said while we were chatting earlier, I mean, this talk isn't just special to the Edinburgh Meetup group. The Right to Left book, which is kind of the basis of this talk, actually has some real connections with Scotland. It's lovely to have Lucy on the call tonight. I mean, the print edition of the book was dedicated to Martin, and there's a message about him in the back of the book. But also, several people on this call bought multiple copies of the book so they could give it away to other people, and that is just so wonderful. I'm really grateful to you guys. Sorry in a way that it's been so many months before I've been able to come and speak to you. But on the other hand, the timing was actually great because the audiobook's just come out, so it's a chance to mention that as well. So that was a lot of work, I have to say. Any of you thinking of doing an audiobook? I can tell you how, even if you understand that it's a lot of work, you'll find that it's even more work than you ever imagined. But it's done and it's out, and I'm thrilled. I'm going to do something a bit different today. What I'm not going to do is share my screen, share PowerPoint slides and so on. I find it just such a bizarre experience, spending an evening staring at a slide. It's bizarre for me, and I imagine for you as well. I'd much rather see a few friendly faces in front of me. It's great that at least some of you have kept your cameras on. One or two of you have kept your microphones on, and it is a little bit on the noisy side. So if you can mute, probably a good idea. But I will be delighted to take questions. If you put them in chat, then the guys here have promised to gather those together and sort of moderate a Q&A at the end, and I'd be delighted to. Yesterday's one I did with Pierre. We actually spent longer on the Q&A than we did on the talk. I don't know whether that's going to happen tonight, but I'm certainly very, very happy to take questions. So I said I'm not going to share slides. I don't want to be staring at PowerPoint. What I am going to do is to share a few snippets in chat here. There's a few things that you can go away and look at, and I don't mind if you're distracted while I'm speaking. If you want something other than me to look at, that's completely fine. So there's all the basic the boring bio slides from the beginning. That's there on chat now. So to right to left, what's right to left all about? We'll get to definitions in a bit, but I'm going to start with a metaphor. Now, I just want you to imagine for a moment, well, actually, before we even get to the metaphor, why do we need the metaphor? And the reason for the need for the metaphor is there are two kinds of agile. There's the kind of agile that brought you here. There's the kind of agile that gets people like me to write books. There's the kind of agile that gets people like you, hopefully to read them. People come into conferences, all this kind of stuff, and we go to work and we're excited about what we're doing, and so on. And it all sounds fantastic. And yet, we live in the age of the agile is dead blog post. If you're a reader of Hacker News, as I am, you'll know that every couple of weeks up will pop some new blog post saying agile is dead, or I'm done with it. I'm never doing Scrum again. All this kind of thing. And if you're excited by agile, that's obviously something that saddens you. So the question is, why is this happening, and what can we do about it? And the explanation tends to be something like, agile has gone mainstream. Don't worry about it. It's good. But I'm just not satisfied with that explanation. Certainly, it does nothing to help you do something about the anger and the frustration that agile is generating in some quarters. So I was really wanting to explore what is it that we're doing, or how is it we're explaining agile that causes such dysfunctional behaviors to happen, and for agile to get this bad reputation. So hence the metaphor. And right to left, it's a perspective, but to explain that perspective first, we'll use a physical metaphor, and we use the metaphor of Lego. Lots of things are best explained with Lego. Now, suppose you had to explain Lego to a Martian. Now, the whole thing, the whole process, everything about Lego. Where would you start? Would you start on the left of the process diagram with truckloads of plastic granules arriving at the Lego factory, or on the right, with the outcome of children playing with the finished product. So plastic granules, children playing with the finished product. Where do you start? Now, everybody, I mean, I've never yet heard anyone say the best place to start to explain Lego is with the plastic granules. We always start with the outcome. So let's try that with Agile. So where's the best place to start when you're explaining Agile? Do you start with backlog items in Jira? Other tracking tools are available. Or do you start on the right with people collaborating over working software that's already beginning to meet needs? So backlog items in Jira, working software, and all the rest. Again, I think most people would agree that it makes more sense to start on the right, not on the left. And yet, trust me, the from the left description is actually the one that prevails, and the drip, drip, drip of explaining Agile in that backlog-driven way is, I think, one of the things that's killing Agile, and it's creating a false understanding of Agile, false expectations of Agile, and some very poor implementations of Agile. Now, if you don't believe me that it's how Agile is explained, let's move on to how would we explain Scrum and Safe. Now, when I give you the two options, you can think about, well, which is the one you prefer and which is the one most often told, and be honest about that. So let's do Scrum. So we might, from the left, we start with 2 levels of backlog, the planning and all those other things that take you forward from those backlogs. Or from the right, a team that's pursuing its objectives goal by goal. So 2 levels of backlog, 2 levels of planning, pursuing shared objectives goal by goal. That's both of those definitions perfectly compatible with the Scrum Guide. And we can do the same thing for Safe. It's actually exactly the same, except it's now N levels of backlog, where N is proportional to the height of your Safe poster. Or from the right, shared objectives pursued goal by goal. I actually looked at, in the research for the Right to Left book, I looked at a range of the scaling frameworks, and actually Safe, I'm not endorsing Safe, it's not that I prefer it, but it was the one whose easily accessible official documentation most easily admitted that right to left interpretation, that iterative goal-driven interpretation. And so this is how we get to these two different kinds of Agile. The disappointing one is the ploughing through backlogs of requirements, where the experience of it is unpleasant or mediocre at best, and where the results that come out of that process are disappointing, mediocre, and all the rest of it. And we get the same thing with transformation as well. We get transformation where we start with a solution, we start with the backlog effectively, a framework or something that needs to be rolled out, and it's rolled out over people's objections and everything else. An unpleasant experience leading to the kind of disappointing kind of Agile that we've already talked about. So that's why 2 kinds of Agile, and that's why this right to left perspective, this left to right perspective, and trying to get people to understand the right to left interpretation of Agile without explaining it in the terms of the left to right terms of Agile. I just don't try doing my utmost to avoid explaining Agile as another project management methodology, but instead that's something that's about collaboration and engagement and iteration and all those other kinds of things. And it has a fundamental change on the way you approach the classic stuff of Agile, the frameworks, the processes, the techniques, and all the rest of it. It's not to say that they're bad, to dismiss them. I'm actually pro-framework, not anti-framework. I'm just against the imposition of framework on unwilling people. And you start to see the frameworks as sources of inspiration, sources of patterns that can be combined in interesting ways, and all those good things. So that's a little bit from the introduction of right to left, just to get you to understand what it's about. I'm going to jump now several chapters later to the last but one chapter of the book. And we're going to do an exercise. It involves two short breakouts of 10 minutes each. And you're going to answer 2 sets of questions. I'll put these questions in chat. I'll do that right away. And after you've gone to your breakout rooms, we'll get Babs to send those out to your breakout rooms again, so that you always got those in front of you. And we're going to ask quite an interesting question, and a question you'll probably need all of those 10 minutes to answer. It's one of these deceptively simple questions. What's happening when we're reaching the right customers, meeting their strategic needs? Just answer that for your team, your organization. What's happening when we're reaching the right customers, meeting their strategic needs? Now, I've highlighted that phrase, strategic needs. It does mean something slightly special. It's their needs, your strategy. So what are the needs that your customers have that intersect with what you're trying to achieve as an organization, or what you're trying to offer as an organization? And you might find it helpful to answer this in terms of stories. You know, what new stories could you tell about your customers if you were doing this right? So we'll send you out to your rooms now to answer that question, or just to discuss that question amongst yourselves, in groups of about 5 people, and we'll take about 10 minutes on that. And as I said, we'll send that question out to you as soon as you've got to your rooms. And I will see you in a few minutes. So Babs will send you away now.
2 seconds. And here we go.
Mike sent me to my room.
And then there were 2.
Yeah. And I'll just send out.
Just send that again. That'd be great. Yeah.
I'll just send out that message to them all.
Yep.
There you go. So they should have all received it now.
Barbara, can you hear me?
Hi, Ishbak. How you doing?
Yeah, not bad, thanks. I'm actually in the middle of fixing the decking. So I'm just listening in for now, okay? This is what you get me being for.
You're breaking up a little bit, Ish.
I'm just going to go on mute, okay?
Okay, no worries, darling. Good stuff.
I'm beginning to roast here. It's actually really warm still. I've closed all the windows to keep it quiet, and I'm getting so warm. So if I start to go live,
and I'd hate to disappoint my kids, so.
It would be the best ever Zoom picture. It would just see the gallery picture jumping up and down.
Babs, you put your hair up.
Yes, yes. Mostly because I haven't brushed it for the last couple of days.
All right.
Lockdown rules.
that's what I did.
It's a reggae look. I thought you were looking quite polished, Mike.
I'm a very simple technique approach to my hair now. I do my moustache and chin at 8 millimeters, and I do my head as well. If I do it often enough, it stays even.
I did my chin 8 weeks ago.
Well, it looked like
getting
a
ready
crown.
for Christmas.
Yeah, it looked like a crown to me, you know. So maybe it's an upgrade.
Right, are we all back?
I'm going to go back on mute.
Yeah.
So, hello.
If perhaps if Babs could mute everyone, I'll then unmute myself. So we're going to do another follow-up session to that session. I hope you found that one interesting. I'll give you a little funny story about that one. I, at the invitation of a friend, visited his client and gave a talk to a senior leadership team, a talk quite similar to this one. And we got to this question, and this was about slide 3, and the rest of the talk just went out the window. We spent the next half an hour just unpacking this question, and actually got really serious about what it meant to be reaching those right customers. What even do they mean by customer? And actually, it was a UN agency. Is it even right to talk about customer in the context of a UN agency, for example? So really, really fascinating conversation just with that one question. So now to another set of questions that you might actually find a little bit easier, especially as agile people, as most of you are. there's a danger with when you get a room full of agile people together. You ask a question and they think, well, the answer must be agile. So how do I answer this question in a way that's about agile? With this second question, that is completely fine. And as soon as you see this next set of questions, you will understand. So your questions for breakout 2 is what stops that? What gets in the way? Or in other words, what are the obstacles in the way of all those good things that you're talking about in that first breakout? Why is that important? What would you like to have happen? And then what happens? And then what happens? So that last string of questions turn the obstacle into something positive, an outcome. And then with then what happens and then what happens, we're looking at the outcome behind the outcome and the outcome behind the outcome behind the outcome. I mean, you can get away with asking that question a surprising number of times. Again, 10 minutes, that won't be long enough. So that's just enough time to kind of get into the groove of these questions. And I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. And I'll explain what this is about and how we got from that introduction to
I'm listening to a talk and I went for exercise at the same time.
Okay, so see you in 10 minutes. Perhaps we'll send you off.
And somebody's not muted.
Yeah, that's fine.
So once again, if you could send that out to the breakout rooms, Babs, that'd be great. Once everyone's gone.
Hello, I'm joining late.
There we go. Already popped them in a room. That's fine. Okay, so let me send out that
Chat.
the communication. So breakout to broadcast message to all.
What happened? What just happened? And how on earth did we get to where you got to from the introduction? So I'll do this in 2 parts. I'll answer the what just happened bit first. So it's just scratching the surface, and that's all you can do in the time and the format of a meetup. But you've experienced the beginning of what's called an outside-in strategy review, and that's from chapter 5 of the book. So we describe 2 outside-in tools in chapter 5, strategy review and a service delivery review. An outside-in, that's an old word, that's an old concept from the strategy world. Inside out is perhaps more familiar to people. You look at your strengths and weaknesses and pain points and those kind of things, and you think about how can we address some of our weaknesses, build on some of our strengths, and so on. That's great for ways of working type stuff, and it's great for finding small improvements. What it doesn't do is help identify where you want to get to. It doesn't help you with positioning and maneuver and all these and competitive strategy and so on. So outside in is a much stronger way of approaching strategy if you want to get to some of those things. And if you're into product strategy, you actually do need some of those things. So outside in means starting with the customer and the environment external to your organization or external to your organizational unit, and working your way in instead. And the way we do it as described in the book, we do it through a series of layers: customer, organization, product, platform, and teams. And we ask some questions like the questions that you asked for each of those layers. And each of those questions you can actually unpack and spend quite a bit of time, working at what they mean for you in its own terms, and also in the terms of the layers you've just encountered. So you're looking not just sort of at that layer, you're also thinking about, well, how does that relate to what we just said about our relationship with the customer, for example. So it's an alignment tool in a way that that many reviews fail really to deliver on. So there's questions. What's happening when we're reaching the right customers, meeting their strategic needs? That's the one that you answered in breakout 1. So for organization, when we're meeting those strategic needs, what kind of organization are we? For products, through what products and services are we meeting those strategic needs? Platform, when we're that kind of organization, meeting those strategic needs, delivering those products and services, what are the capabilities that make it all possible? And lastly, teams, when we're achieving all of the above, what kind of teams are we? And they're quite actually, you know, in a way, quite simple questions, and they're leading you through that journey from the outside of the organization through to the inside, helping you reflect, helping you connect between the layers, and also it's an invitation through that "what's happening" phrase to consider, you know, what would good look like, what would the ideal look like. And that takes you then to the second breakout. You know, what stops that? What are the obstacles? Now, if we're serious about strategy, we've got to start from where we are now, overcome whatever's in the way of getting, and overcome whatever is getting in the way of us getting to where we want to. And, you know, we need to make the investments, the commitments, and everything else that we need to make that happen. So quite, it's certainly not the last word on strategy, but it's still, you know, a more thorough strategy review than many people have experienced. And I've open sourced the template with the questions in and so on, and that's in the links that I shared just now. The other thing that you practiced was, again, just scratching the surface, a very simplified version of our clean language based coaching game called 15-minute photo. So 15 minutes because it's that quick, and photo stands for from obstacles to outcomes. And I explained a little bit when I described the questions for breakout 2. The coolest thing about 15-minute photo isn't actually the question. The clean language questions are fantastic. The coolest thing is that you are getting different people, and for everybody gets to play. Everybody gets to play in all the roles. And that means, for example, you will have a member of staff coaching a manager, asking him what he would like to have happen. A manager coaching a staff member, asking, well, what are your obstacles and what would you like to have happen, and so on, and what kind of, all these other great questions. And these are conversations that most organizations aren't having, or if they do have them at all, they have it with, you know, external coaches and external consultants and so on. And what we're really trying to do is to help change the language of the organization. Now, it's not something that happens overnight, but if enough people, have some insights through the game, that is value in itself. Quite apart from the value of the outputs that this game produces, it produces lots of outcomes that we can organise, you know, in interesting strategic ways. So that's 15-minute photo, and that's another one of the links that I've left. So how do we get to here? So we talked a bit in the introduction a bit about, you know, two kinds of agile. The left to right version of agile is starting with backlogs, ploughing through backlogs of requirements, mediocre, miserable experience sometimes, delivering results that are disappointing, or mediocre at best to customers. And the right to left version, you know, ones where we are really serious about meeting needs, realizing outcomes, and when we're talking about outcomes, the most meaningful of outcomes are the ones that involve meeting needs. Very, very easy thing to understand. And then everything else, we work backwards from there. So what do we need to do in order to get to the point where we can demonstrate that we've met those needs? We're clear about what those needs are, we've anticipated the need, and now we've actually released something, and we're checking that the customer is, you know, isn't just happy that we've delivered something, but that their need is met. And when you take that kind of perspective, it changes the way you look at things like the frameworks. I think I mentioned this already. You see frameworks not as things to impose on people, but sources of inspiration and sources of patterns that you can combine in interesting ways, and so on. So that's chapter 3, in fact, is taking you through all the sort of major easily recognized frameworks from the lean agile world, you know, Kanban, Scrum, XP, a bit of DevOps, a bit of theory of constraints, a bit of design thinking, service design, all those kinds of things. So these are things that your typical agile coach probably is an expert in one or two of those and has a passing knowledge of a few more. Your digital leader coming to this cold is probably, and maybe you've heard of some of these things, but doesn't understand how they fit together and how they can complement each other and so on. And we're trying to get them out of that frame of mind where they think it's their job to choose one to impose on their teams. Chapter 4, we get onto the questions of scale. talk a bit about the scaling frameworks, talk a bit about the challenges of change and so on. So we're already getting an idea of what my kind of agile is. It does relate back to that, so that right to left thing at the beginning. You know, people collaborating over the rapid evolution of working software that's already beginning to meet needs. That's the definition. That's I will share a page of not quite definitions, but my kind ofs. So my kind of agile, my kind of lean, and so on. Let me find that. My definition of done is in there as well. So that was quite popular when I first published that one. Someone's need was met as my definition of done. I would argue that's the only definition of done you'll ever need. Slightly tongue-in-cheek, perhaps. So then we get to chapter 5, a chapter about strategy and this outside-in kind of strategy. And actually we get to an even more, I think actually a more powerful definition of my kind of agile. It's not just a right to left kind of agile. It's also a wholehearted kind of agile. And, you know, we talk about wholehearted. There's a link I can share that goes into the wholehearted thing in more detail. But really, if you just think about wholehearted, it involves a few things. There's like an integrity, a wholeness to it. And that comes from, in the case of, you know, agile, development being properly connected to other aspects of the organization, strategy and organization development. You know, I call out in particular, but, you know, there are other aspects as well that I mentioned. And where does the energy come from? It comes from people connected to purpose. And that takes us to the last chapter. So the last chapter is about the inverted organization, you know, inverted pyramids, that kind of stuff, and servant leadership. So the book takes you on a journey. It starts with really basic stuff, you know, a really simple metaphor, using that metaphor to explain lean, to explain agile, to take you through the frameworks at small scale and larger scale, and then into the bigger picture, questions of organization design and leadership behaviors and so on. So it's a very gentle journey if you're new to lean, new to agile. If you're a practitioner, what makes it interesting isn't the detail, it's that singular focus on needs and outcomes. And as I said at the beginning, you know, I think that backlog-driven view of agile is actually killing agile. And I genuinely, in all sincerity, worry about it, worry for it. If we can get enough people deliberately, first of all, practicing explaining agile in that right to left, outcome-oriented way, and that message then spreading, then maybe there's a chance that you know it'll enjoy another fruitful couple of decades, like most of the decades that have, you know, we've enjoyed this century. So that's my hope. That's why I wrote the book. I've written 3 books now. In every case, I've written a book that I thought needed to be written, and I thought that no one else would write. And Right to Left is in that category. It is also, of my 3 books, the most accessible. As I said at the beginning, I'm so thrilled that people in Edinburgh have actually bought copies to give to other people. And I'm thrilled now to be you know, have the chance to say thank you and to talk to you tonight. So that's me done. That's the end of my talk. I will put the you know, the last slide, the contact me slide, up on chat. I don't know if there have been questions in chat, and if
I did ask Mike if there were any questions for you. I didn't see any.
Yeah. So
I didn't see any coming through.
Yeah.
Didn't see any coming through. So yeah, our usual format is just to ask attendees to add them in, prefix with a queue, so we can sift through them. But no, thanks for the
Absolutely, my pleasure.
session. No, it was enjoyable, and I fondly remember your opening keynote from LLKD 18. I was sitting next to you, and I was keeping the time for you on that session because we were helping Cozy out that year. But you didn't need it, obviously. You didn't need it. But no, it was a good session, and yeah, I've enjoyed both the gender shift and right to left. And
good, thank you. Yeah, if you, I didn't really talk about agenda shift, but you know, if you want to take that whole outcome-oriented perspective and apply it to the challenges of change and transformation, well, that's what, you know, agenda shift is about. You know, there's a whole community around that as well as the book. And right to left was the yeah, like the our teaser to get people into that.
No, I think what's great about Right to Left is it is quite unique. So as a sort of compilation of a whole bunch of ideas, but as you kind of explained this evening, and I've read it a couple of times, it's that really important idea of being sort of outcome focused and thinking about, well, actually, what do our customers actually need?
Yes.
So in our 2 breakout sessions, we did have really good conversations around that whole idea and the importance of that idea. To make organizations truly successful, you have to meet someone's needs, and I do remember your definition of done. It's slightly simplistic, but yeah, it's one way than the rest.
I even describe it in writing sometimes as my deliberately provocative definition of done. I know it annoys people, but it annoys people in a good way. It makes them think of it. Yeah.
well, there's maybe a question for you, because we would have a little bit of time. So, on that very definition, I mean, what sort of debate has that generated? I mean, how violently opposed are people to you making such a statement?
I think I've got to say the actual reception was incredibly positive. I mean, I had a 3-figure number of responses in LinkedIn, so I could actually easily talk in terms of percentages, and it was like
So you should.
90 or 95% positive, but a few people were just very offended that the concept that they teach in class had now been subverted, and they didn't like that. It's not that it's just like a throwaway thing. There's some, clearly some serious points to be made. And if you're going to take that on as your definition of done, you've got to understand, well, whose need are we meeting, and what is the need? How are we going to meet that need, and how will we be able to demonstrate that we have actually met it? And it's if you're familiar with the Three Amigos conversation, in a way, that's Three Amigos conversation. And let's phrase things in those kinds of terms, at the beginning of any piece of work. So that's part of what I mean by starting with needs. There's more to it than that. The strategy stuff's important as well. You need to anticipate needs. You need to decide actually which of the needs we most want to meet. I'm certainly not suggesting that we do away with things like user research and customer collaboration, all these kinds of things. But we also need to make some choices for ourselves as well. Teams that can only do what they're told to do by their customers are usually on a desperate spiral of doom. It's actually pretty horrible to watch. And actually, the systems theory of the 70s will tell you why that is. Any organization, and when I say organization, I mean organizational unit, team. Any organizational unit that doesn't have a strategy has its viability, its independent existence at risk. I shocked a few people yesterday when I mentioned outsource. What assumptions are in that what's happening when you're reaching meeting their strategic needs question. One of the assumptions is that it's going to be you meeting them, and it might be someone else. It might be a competitor. And if you're a team that doesn't have a strategy, well, perhaps you're going to be outsourced. If you don't have a strategy that makes you better than outsource, why do you exist? That was a shocking thought for me to put out yesterday. And it's not that I'm suggesting that outsource is a good thing. I certainly don't. I'm certainly not suggesting that. What I am suggesting is that you need to have a strategy. You need to start thinking about these things, where you want to get to in some kind of time frame. What kind of direction do you want to move in? What kind of commitments do you need to make in order to achieve that? And that applies at team level, at product level, as well as organizational level. And those different levels need to connect to each other. So now we're getting to this wholeheartedness thing again. It's about these things being integrated in the whole and so on. And if there's a deep message behind the book, as well as the message about outcomes, it's probably that. We've actually, since the book was published, we turned that into our mission statement. We're in the business of building wholehearted organizations. It's one of the first links you see on the Agenda Shift homepage. And you'll see this word wholehearted all over the place. It's a word that caught people's imaginations even before the book was published. We actually had a wholehearted curry in London around one of my workshops. We took over a corner.
Watch how you spell that one.
It was hilarious. We took over a corner of it was quite a large curry restaurant. We had a table for about 16 people. And we had stuff going up on the walls with different people's ideas of what wholehearted meant and so on. It was really awesome.
We do have a few questions coming through now, so
Yeah.
that's great. Let's
Oh,
work through them
Marika was there.
yeah, in my breakout. Yeah. We've got one here from Jack. It's a good one. So, in orgs with multiple dependencies, how can you keep the outcome? How do you keep the outcome the key focus? I find one team often knows the outcome that others are focusing on outcome.
Yeah. Well, a key word for me is participation. You know, it's actually making sure that you have the right number of people, the right people in the room, the right number of people in the room, the richness of conversations happening between teams as well as within teams. And that again is part of this wholehearted vision. Yeah, there are technical things that you can do and some practical things you can do. I mean, technically, making sure that your dependencies are at least visible and managed is a pretty important first step. You know, thinking back, you know, to a you know, for example, my government digital projects. You know, we in carers allowance, for example, we had dependencies on getting Welsh translations made because carers allowance applied in both England and Wales. And any piece of work that involved Welsh translation, it had an indicator on it. We could see it from the back of the room. We could tell which ones were going to need Welsh translation. We knew which ones were going to need input from policy. And you know, much as we want to have a cross-functional team, we weren't going to have a team in Preston with the capability both to do the Welsh translations and to answer every possible policy question and legal question and everything else. So there will always be dependencies if you're doing anything challenging enough. And they need to be visible, and you need to actively manage them. And you need to time things appropriately. You need to so that things land at the right times and that kind of thing. Getting beyond that, you know, starting to get you know, proper rich exchanges between teams. I remember on another one of the government digital projects, I started in a situation, I was delivery manager, started in a situation where there were two teams that were kind of at loggerheads. You know, one team in the other team's eyes were the cowboys, you know, these agile guys. And the other team was thinking of that first team was like the dinosaurs, like the mainframe guys. But we actually finished, you know, after some difficult, embarrassing conversations, difficult conversations, we actually ended up with people from both teams sitting in the same room, you know, multiple days a week. And you know, that was absolutely massive. And then making sure that we, you know, timing features to arrive with, you know, the API changes or whatever that needed to be done. You know, we could ensure that. So yeah, dependencies are a frequent source of frustration, and you have to be really serious about managing them. And you have to get beyond the finger pointing and the blame and everything else, and find some practical solutions, both technical and people related to make that work really well. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Mike. Got a cracker here. So people often start explaining Agile with the manifesto principles.
Yep.
I've often done that. From your experience, do you think these still resonate with org leadership, and are they interested?
I would. It's kind of a yes and no answer. I actually those of you who read Right to Left will know that I'm actually very respectful towards the Agile Manifesto, and I was careful not to give any of my definitions in a way that contradicted it. I do think talking about lean Agile gives you a little latitude that talking about Agile on its own doesn't. And I took advantage of that in the book, but I was always, first of all, declared when I did it, and I also made it plain that I realised that there were multiple points of view that were valid as well. I explained that. What I don't think works, I've seen some very nice, well, to me seems very nice, and I have been a senior manager, you know, I've been an executive director in an investment bank, I've been a CTO. The idea that, you know, when I was, you know, if someone 20 years ago had said, oh, by the way, just read this manifesto and then everything will be wonderful, is a bit naive, and you do from time to time see that kind of advice in LinkedIn. I'll just send in the manifesto, and it's not going to work. what we actually do need are some real conversations about what it is we want to achieve and what obstacles are in the way of that. And that's what I spent the whole of the last 4 or 5 years doing. That's what agenda shift is all about. Getting people to articulate both the positive and the negative, and finding, find some way of organising those thoughts in a way that helps get us moving in the right direction. It's an engagement model. It's a tool that coaches and consultants can use to help engage with the organisation, help the organisation engage with its staff, help maintain engagement within the organisation as different parts are moving at different speeds and all of that. So yeah, I honestly have a ton of respect for the Agile Manifesto. I really do. I'm sure that comes out in the book. People on the call will confirm or deny that, but I have genuine respect for the Agile Manifesto. Is it on its own? Is it going to tell everything you need to know? Is someone who isn't familiar with Agile going to read it and think, oh, I get exactly what that's all about? I think the whole right to left and left to right thing is proof, or the Agile is dead state that we're in now is proof that is not enough on its own. And even if it were, there's so much bad Agile out there that we've got to explain with a lot more care and clarity actually what it's all about. And that's what I've been endeavouring to do. And that's the focus of this book in particular. Yep.
I think you are respectful to the manifesto.
That's a relief.
Yeah. Well, I think you are.
Yep.
And I've read it a couple of times. So yep. Got an interesting one here. It's a long one. Thanks, Scott. Amazon is not an agile company. I agree with that. It's an automated one, but it's touted as having business agility.
Yep.
Is agile coaching just for the slow learners who can't imagine or establish an Amazon tech-led machine environment, a kind of palliative care on failing companies? I like that, Scott.
It's long, but it's worth it.
You just wanted me to read out, didn't you?
You recognise this. I've often heard coaching is described as therapy, and in fact, many of the tools of coaching actually have their roots in therapy. Interestingly enough, and clean language is actually one of them. Its roots are in psychotherapy. But I am very clear that I am not a therapist. I'm not qualified to do therapy. And I have been very clear about where I draw my borders. So that's point number one. So I actually think therapy is a slightly dangerous metaphor in the first place. And I'm saying this out of full respect for the therapists, really. Second point is, I mentioned there are some essential things that all organisations need. They need some delivery, they need some strategy, they need identity, various other things, all mentioned in the book. Another one is development, not in the sense of software development, but organisation development. Organisations need to actually maintain their health. They need to adapt to changing environments, not just in terms of requirements for products, but in terms of things like, cultural norms and so on. The world we live in is very different now to the world of even 20 years ago. And organisations need to understand that and keep pace with that. And that does actually create, and most organisations aren't excellent at that. And so they then need some help. And this is where, external coaches and consultants and trainers and all these other things, have a role to play. I've given some reasons why I think therapy is actually a slightly dangerous metaphor. Another reason is that I find, in my experience, and I may actually be making a judgmental statement when I say this, I actually think going in being judgmental and using a metaphor that implies the bad health or bad motives or bad something else is not always the best starting point if you want to engage authentically with people and want them to engage authentically with you. So I go in it with much more of a facilitator's mindset. I have opinions, I have solutions, but I don't go there selling those from the off. I hope that I'm genuine in my efforts to understand what's going on, to engage, to help bring obstacles to the surface, to help understand where people want to get to when they've overcome those obstacles, and so on. That's that engagement model again. You know, what I've tried to do is sort of codify that kind of process in Agenda Shift, and it doesn't come with a judgmental mindset. In my advanced workshops, we even explore how can we look empathetically at something that on face value looks like just something that's really bad. But then those of you who've seen the Shine pyramid, artifacts at the top and values, base assumptions, all that kind of stuff, and you start to you kind of do a mesh up between that and systems thinking. Something put that obstacle there. Something is sustaining it, keeping it there and keeping it in place there. And if you can explain your obstacle in terms of values, you can start being charitable, you can start being empathetic, and you are avoiding putting a barrier between you and the people that you are trying to help. And you're encouraging teams not to finger point to their managers or to other teams and so on, and start to focus on what the real issue is rather than some personification of it. These are tough messages, tough things to teach sometimes, but we need to do better, and that applies to coaches as well as to organisations. And just going in as a coach with a solution to sell is, I actually believe, a source of some of the unhealthiness in the Agile community, and I refuse to do anything that looks remotely like that.
Well said.
Like I said, I have opinions, and at the right time I will share them forcefully. But at the beginning of an engagement with a client, coming with a solution is not the time. Yeah.
No, I agree. I don't see any more questions. I think you might be off the hook, Mike.
I've just shocked you all. Yes.
No, I think it's always nice to finish on a.
And on that bombshell.
I was going to say. I literally was going to say that. No, I think there's a lot of value in, as you say, taking that approach. But you're not going to come in and go straight into some sort of solutionising before you fully understood the problem.
No.
And I used to certainly talk a lot about are you solving the right problem?
And if the people,
problem are you trying to solve?
Yes, and I'm happy that people find obstacles that they want to overcome. I'm even happier when they find solutions themselves. And if you can turn that into a habit, which does actually take some organisation design, because you need some rhythm and you need some expectations from the organisation, and you need some of the right expectations from leaders for that to be sustained. Then you've got a chance. Improvements, people talk about cycles of improvement, but those cycles of improvement aren't perpetual motion machines. There has to be something that keeps it going. This is why I was very careful in Agenda Shift to say it's not just continuous improvement. I always get a little bit upset when people say, "Oh, that's what it is." You have to, I've seen too many continuous improvement initiatives just, run away into the dust very quickly. Even with the best of intentions to start with, because they just don't have what it takes to keep going. And this is why bottom-up agile can work. It can be amazing when it takes off and it all goes viral and it explodes. But if someone just lazily says, "Oh, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to see what happens," you are leaving an awful lot to chance. And I'm sure that the majority won't get very far. Certainly not break through the glass ceiling at team level. I mean, I talk to so many coaches that complain, they engage at team level and they can't get the attention of the organisation. If the organisation doesn't want to know, then the whole thing hasn't really started in the right place. You haven't actually got the right people in the room even to begin with, and that's a problem. I'm fortunate, perhaps, that I'm engaged by people that are the right people and can get the right people. And I certainly understand how hard it is being a coach, with a team, and frustrated that it's so hard to get anything changed outside the team. I quite often end on this sort of note of. It's not quite a note of gloom. It's a note, in a way, it's a note of empathy. I know how hard it is. I just don't believe in saying there's easy answers when actually there aren't. Now, I know that people struggle with this stuff. And And the more honest we are, and the more honest more people are about what it takes to do this properly, the more chance we actually have of having the opportunities to do it, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. Any final questions for Mike before I bring the session to a close? Give Mike some time back, and all you wonderful people get on with your evenings. No, going once, as I say, going twice. No, I think we're all good. You're off the hook, Mike.
Right. Well, thank you very much again for having me. I was genuinely really keen to.
It was great to have you here. And actually, yours was the second session that we had, because your session has been planned in the diary for a long time. And between now and this session, we've done several virtual remote sessions. Yours was planned, unfortunately, to be our next face-to-face session, I think, wasn't it? Because you were due to be up in Edinburgh.
I was.
So it's a shame that didn't happen. But yeah, it's always good to see you, and thanks for your time. Really enjoyed your session there. I'm going to give you a wee round of applause there. I usually go for
thank you very much. Thank you.
You're going to get a proper one. So no, thanks again. Appreciate that. And obviously, people do know your books. You've mentioned a couple of them. You've got your agenda shift, Slack channel, and various other resources that people can make use of. So I'm sure they can dig those out and check those out after the session. And you've shared a few links, so thanks for doing that. Just a usual sort of close. Thank you again all for joining us. Great session. I certainly enjoyed the breakout chats we had, and a lot of the stuff did resonate. And I think a lot of us, as Mike mentioned, do kind of face a lot of the same challenges and problems. Just to whet your appetite, really, we have now published our full schedule for June. So some of you might have seen that if you are part of our LinkedIn group. So do check that out. Our next session next Wednesday to open June is with Douglas Squirrel and Jeffrey Friedrich, and they've just published Agile Conversations, which I'm reading at the moment, and it's fab, and it's hot off the presses. So that should be a great session. They're great chaps, and they're going to do a session talking about some of the themes in that book. So do join us for that if you can. And then the week after that, we have Tony Ponton joining us from Australia, and he'll be talking about how to do big room planning remotely. That should be a great session. And we have many more, as I'm sure you know, planned and published. We'll have Red Team Thinking the week after that. So do check them out. And thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And we hope we'll see you again. Thanks.
And thanks to you, Sath, for chairing it, and thanks, Babs, for doing the questioning bits. And thanks for that.
No problems. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your evenings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Yes, thank you.